Well, there is a man here. He offered you something. Well, there is a man here. He might be happy to see you. Well, there is a man here. Well, he seems to be pointing and nodding at something. Well, there is a man here. I know Deltarune's Eggman. It's a mystery that has captured Deltarune fans from the get-go for almost 7 years now. In each chapter, there is a man hiding behind a tree. He hands Chris an egg and then disappears. It was weird enough already, but ever since the release of chapters 3 and 4 a few weeks ago, it has really only gotten weirder. What was once a simple room with a tree has become a lot more elaborate. An entire island in chapter 3, and a doctor's office in chapter 4. An interaction that took all of 30 seconds before now has multiple NPCs, complete with long monologues. It's all pretty weird, and it can be hard to make sense of at first. I've yet to see anyone really dig into all of these interactions and piece together what it all means. And that's fair. I've been spending my time trying to let all the new information we learned from these chapters enter my brain. There's a huge amount to unpack. But this is one mystery that I think people are struggling to make heads or tails of. Who is the Eggman? Or perhaps a better question, what does he represent? What's with the Game Boy style island? Did Chris study to become a therapist in the 4 years between chapters? And wait, is that So Sorry in chapter 4? There's a lot of questions to answer, so bear with me and I'll unpack it all. I think I know Deltarune's Eggman. We'll start with the basics, covering the Eggman's appearances in chapters 1 and 2, and what I think they mean. We'll talk about the strange letter written by him, which came with one of the Deltarune newsletters back at the start of 2024, and then we'll dig into the 2 new Eggman rooms, and how they build on the foundations Toby Fox already laid. Strap in folks, you're about to hear me say the word egg roughly 152 times. Feel free to count along if you like. So what's funny is that I was a little bit dismissive about the Eggman in my last video. Lancer tells us that we won't get through our teen years without at least one egg. That must mean that missing the eggs will give you the bad ending and terrible things will happen. Everything is fucked without the eggs. I'm sure you can tell I find this whole thing pretty silly. I made that video in February, and since then, I've thought a lot about the Eggman. There's something kind of addictive about how obscure and weird he is. For those who are out of the loop, it's exactly how I described it in the beginning. There's a hidden room in every chapter of Deltarune. While chapter 3 is an outlier, all the rest follow the exact same pattern. There's a very low chance of the room appearing between 2 very specific screens, here in chapter 1, here in chapter 2, and here in chapter 4. We'll talk a bit more about chapter 3 in a bit. After walking back and forth for a while, Chris will end up in the room alone, and after speaking to a man hiding behind a tree, Chris will receive an egg. It's functionally useless, using the egg does nothing, but in the first 2 chapters you can take it back to the light world and place it somewhere around town, with some fun dialogue as a result. When I made that video earlier this year, I was pretty willing to write it off as a simple joke about Easter eggs, but ever since it's continued nagging at me. The weirdness, it's so rich for analysis. So a few weeks before chapters 3 and 4 released to the world, I wrote a blog post detailing my thoughts, and in light of the new chapters, I think my conclusions were actually pretty spot on. I'll catch you up with the basics. Listen, here's the situation. Something you and I are going to have to contend with today is that the Eggman is overwhelmingly up for interpretation. You, watching this right now, are probably going to have your own thoughts and feelings about who this man is and what his purpose is. You might think Gaster is at the heart of this. Perhaps Papyrus is the man behind the tree. Fucking every man? Who knows? Either way, we're starting here from very different points of view, so let's find some common ground here. The Eggman's eggs are Easter eggs. Not that kind necessarily, but the media type. A hidden feature, a collectible, or a hard-to-spot reference. The Eggman is a character you can only find through obscure knowledge or insane luck. It's hidden for players to find. This whole interaction is, by definition, an Easter egg, and the egg itself is referencing that hidden nature. Now that feels frustrating for a lot of people who think the egg itself is symbolically important. But the thing is, eggs aren't important in Deltarune. They never have been. They're Toby Fox's favourite punchline. Look, here's an example. In Chapter 2, Lancer says, "Last one there is a fresh and fragrant egg." And then he goes on to say, "You won't get through your teen years without at least one egg," a reference to Earthbound. But sure, that's just one offhand egg mention, right? Surely it doesn't mean much for the relevance of eggs as a symbol in Deltarune. Well, you've also got this scene of egg puns, including the now iconic Egg's husband line, Spamton referring to Pippis as eggs, Tenor referring to this Pippis as an egg, hell, Toby Fox referring to Pippis as eggs, a bunch of references to eggnog, Temmie's egg, which is a reference to an egg in Undertale, You Sweet Basket of Eggs, Egg Boy, Asgore painting Yoshi eggs for Asriel and then cooking them, great move Asgore, eggs in the cooking minigame, and Jockington in a nest with soccer ball eggs. I think it's safe to say that eggs in and of themselves aren't sacred in Deltarune. It's hard to believe they carry much symbolic weight when they're used as a punchline constantly. You'd expect Toby Fox to be a lot more careful with how and when he referenced them if they were deeply important. But he doesn't. But don't worry, that's not to say they mean nothing. Now that we know the egg references the idea of Easter eggs, the fun video game secret kind, we can broaden this thing out even further. In the first 2 chapters of Deltarune, the Eggman is a deconstruction of the entire concept of Easter eggs. Have you ever wondered why we call them Easter eggs in the first place? Bear with me for a history lesson. You'll understand why I bring this up by the end. It goes back to the early 1980s. Lip Sync's Funky Town was at the top of the charts, Pac-Man was just about to sweep the nation.
I like the little man. He's really neat. He eats up all the other things, you know.
And executives at Atari were pissed off. 15-year-old Adam Clayton had just sent a letter to the company, letting them know he had found a hidden room in their recently released title Adventure for the Atari 2600. The room had a hidden message, created by Warren Robinett. At the time, many video game companies, including Atari, refused to credit game designers for their work. In this article from Paste magazine, Robinett said, "The game designers were kept anonymous to prevent them from getting known and having bargaining power. It was a power play by the new owners, Warner Communications." Frustrated by this policy and inspired by rumours that the Beatles had left hidden messages in their music, Robinett decided to leave a hidden message of his own in Adventure, without telling anyone at Atari he had done it. It wasn't until they received Clayton's letter that Atari executives found out it existed, and they wanted it removed. But Director of Software Development at the company Steve Wright argued that these sorts of secrets gave players an extra incentive to continue playing the games. It kept them on the hook by asking them to search every nook and cranny, just like a literal Easter egg hunt. So company policy shifted, with multiple future titles including Missile Command, Yar's Revenge, and even the infamous E.T. the Extraterrestrial featuring the initials of the developers hidden somewhere in the game. Wright would coin the term Easter egg in a 1981 issue of Electronic Games magazine, and the rest is history. And hey, just for fun, if you were wondering how to find that Easter egg in Adventure, the player has to carry 3 objects separately to a specific room, eventually allowing you to walk through the wall and find Robinett's name, immortalized. But wait a minute, let's describe that process again. A secret in a video game which asks the player to walk to and from a seemingly arbitrary spot, eventually allowing them to access a hidden room and a fun secret. Sounds a lot like the Eggman, huh? See, I told you the Atari digression would pay off. Deltarune's Eggman isn't just an Easter egg. It's intentionally invoking one of the most iconic Easter eggs of all time, Warren Robinett's Adventure Easter egg. And in doing so, it breaks that process down to its bare essentials. Complete a mundane task like walking back and forth for a while, receive an item and some minor unique dialogue as your reward, and watch a counter tick up, tracking how many of these secrets you've found. The definition of Easter egg is incredibly broad, so a lot of them are going to fall outside of this rough framework, but you've definitely encountered lots of them that fit this exact bill. I recently finished Alan Wake Remastered, a game whose Easter eggs align pretty much exactly with what I've just described. You walk to an area you're not being directly pointed to by the game, and receive a collectible or some unique dialogue. Hell, there are multiple examples of games which feature this type of Easter egg in the form of actual eggs too. Limbo, a wonderful indie 2D puzzle game, has secret eggs scattered throughout, which unlock achievements when you find them. Banjo-Kazooie has stop and swap eggs, which are functionally useless in the original release, but carry the same sort of mystique. Plus, Deltarune already references Banjo's strange stop-and-swap feature through the Ice Key. Turns out the idea of collecting strange eggs that don't seem to do much was already done 27 years ago. Anyway, generally speaking, Easter eggs can't make a strong impact on the game's narrative or gameplay, because they're hidden with the understanding that only a small number of players will go out of their way to find them. But for the people that do, it heightens the experience dramatically. Like Steve Wright realized at Atari in the early 80s, these types of secrets engage players, motivating them to pay closer attention, to spend longer with the experience. It's this, I think, that the eggs check dialogue refers to. The most common interpretation I see of this line is a literal one. Not too important, so collecting the eggs won't majorly affect the narrative or the lore, but not too unimportant, it still has an impact. But I think it makes a lot more sense when you're looking at it through this lens, this deconstruction of the Easter egg. It's not too important, the item is functionally useless, but not too unimportant. It's still technically speaking a reward. What I love about this way of understanding the Eggman is that, objectively speaking, it has been a success. Easter eggs should, in theory, compel players to spend longer with a game, to understand it on a deeper level. And even when stripped down to its bare essentials, as we see with the Eggman, players are still falling over themselves to hunt for these eggs, building elaborate theories out of them, myself included. We'll talk a bit more about the purpose of this deconstruction, why Toby Fox wants players to interact with his game like this, when we get to Chapter 3's Egg Room in a few moments' time. Regardless, as I'm sure you know by now, the Eggman's appearances in Chapters 3 and 4 are different. Heftier, even. There's a lot to unpack, and like I said earlier, I know it's left a lot of people scratching their heads. I'm really excited to dig into it, but if you could allow me one last detour before we get there, there's actually one crucial piece of evidence we need to talk about, something that perfectly frames what we're about to get into with the new chapters and the Eggman's appearances there. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we have to go back to Valentine's Day. If you were signed up for the Undertale/Deltarune newsletter in the winter of 2024, you would have received a romantic email from Toby Fox on Valentine's Day. 3 special Valentine's cards from various Toby Fox characters were included. Mine were Toriel, Hathy, and Queen, if you were wondering. There were 44 in total, each with its own rarity, so it was a bit of a community effort to collect them all. One of the rarest ones was this, a strange letter written by an unknown sender. It breaks from the established style all the other cards adhere to, featuring narration, no associated sprite, and it's significantly longer than the rest. Here's what it says. It's a strange letter, it's more or less completely illegible. But if you squint your eyes, and you squint your heart, for some reason you feel you could understand it. Well, Happy New Year! Or was it the old year? Well, in any case, how is Deltarune? As you are waiting patiently, the time is going around. There was even a rumour of Valentine's Day. How absurd. Every day is a day of love, if only you believe it so. Do you believe it so? So, the purpose of the message. I want to help. Yes, there was someone I wanted to help. I seem to have forgotten who. Yes, it's quite ironic, but I seem to have forgotten. Was it myself? No. Well, perhaps. Regardless, when I see them, I'm certain I will know it straight away. I never forget someone I don't remember. Will you help me? You were very odd responding out loud to a letter, but you seem reliable. I will be counting on you. Now, put on your coat and wash your face. Or put on your face and wash your coat. Not necessarily in that order. Or in any order at all. Goodbye. There was a sound like something walking away, and the letter was gone. Not exactly what I'd call romantic, but it is fascinating, and it whipped a lot of people up into a frenzy. Who wrote this letter? Was it Garster? Gerson maybe? A future secret boss? There just wasn't enough information at the time to say one way or the other, although that didn't stop me from writing a whole blog post about it. While I dismissed the possibility at the time, we can now say with relative certainty that the letter is from the Eggman. The author repeats the word well, just like the Eggman, they speak in all caps, and the line put on your coat and wash your face obviously mirrors this line from chapter 3, wash your face and get dressed. So, case closed? Well, not quite. It's great to know who the letter's author is supposed to be, but it's pretty meaningless if we don't know what the letter is actually about. So, what does it all mean? As we've already established, the Eggman is less of a character in the traditional sense, and more an embodiment of something. That makes him easily malleable. Toby Fox can use him for a variety of topics. When we get to the new chapters, we'll talk about how that shifts around, and in particular how the feelings and opinions of Toby Fox come through quite strongly. But you can start to see that take form here. While it's written in the voice of the Eggman, this is really a letter from Toby Fox. It sounds a bit silly at face value, but it's not the first time Fox has relayed a message through one of his characters. Shortly after Undertale's release, he wrote this blog post where he responds to the suggestion that the game is prejudiced, in character as Sans. You can also see some personal sentiment come through in his Gaster tweets, which preface the release of every chapter of Deltarune. When Gaster says he's been waiting a long time, or asks the reader to return in 24 hours, that's Toby Fox's own feelings shining through. So when it comes to the Valentine's letter, we see Toby Fox talking quite earnestly about the production of Deltarune, and his reasons for continuing to make the game. Let's take a closer look. With this opening narration, Toby Fox bridges the Valentine's theming into a conversation about Deltarune itself. If the phrasing and the sentiment feel familiar, Deltarune.com's FAQ has a pretty similar quote. To a certain type of people, attuned a certain type of way, this game can reach a meaning beyond its appearance and find a shape in your heart. The narration in the letter is saying something similar here. Art is strange and doesn't always make sense at face value. It's not enough to just see it. To understand Deltarune, we have to feel it, looking beyond its surface level appearance and build that emotional connection. When we're connecting with Fox's work, we squint our heart to do just that. This line is a key example of the Eggman's muddled speech. He doubles back, often directly contradicting himself. But for Toby Fox and his experience making Deltarune, I think this line has a lot more depth. Time often starts to bleed together when you're working on a long project. The Valentine's newsletter was released at the start of 2024. At that point, it had been years since the release of Chapter 2, and it would be another year and a half until the release of Chapters 3 and 4. That starts to weigh on you, yet another year coming and going without anything to show for it publicly, knowing that 2024 was going to come and go without a release too. In a lot of ways, it might as well be the old year. In this line, we see another, more subtle example of the author inverting their sentences, speaking in contradictory or ironic terms. Here, Toby Fox asks, "How is Deltarune?" knowing that he himself is one of few people that can actually answer that question. It feeds back into the Eggman's characterization as muddled or forgetful, while signaling to the reader that yes, we're talking about the game itself. Here, we come back to the production. Fox is incredibly conscious of how long it's taking to release the game. In fact, it was only a couple months earlier, in October of 2023, when he shared the news that they were no longer aiming to release Chapter 5 alongside 3 and 4, focusing their efforts instead on the first two. At the time he said, "My original plan was to release Chapter 3, 4 and 5 together. However, the finish line of Chapter 5 is still pretty far off, and I don't think anybody really wants to wait that long to release anything, especially me." He's appreciative of the audience's patience, but afraid of how much longer development is taking than originally anticipated. He didn't expect to have to ask people to wait this long. The next couple lines continue to act as the bridge between the theming and the content, so let's skip forward a little bit. This section is fantastic, but a little bit difficult to unpack. What starts as an offer here becomes a plea by the end. As established, the Eggman is constantly inverting his sentences, almost fighting himself. If you've ever worked on a long-term creative project, this might start to sound familiar. Fox is struggling here with the opposing feelings of procrastination and obligation. He says it's quite ironic to sit down and write a letter only to forget its purpose. At that point, he had been working on Deltarune full-time for almost 9 years. It's not surprising that those initial motivations for making the game would start to fade away, and tough questions would start to arise. Am I still in love with these ideas? Do I still feel as strongly about realizing them as I once did? While the sentences get flipped, it's clear the author wants to help themselves, not somebody else. They acknowledge the possibility here. Fox is looking to remind himself why this project matters so deeply to him. And he finds his answer here at the end. Since we know the Eggman constantly inverts his own sentences, let's do that here for ourselves. I am reliable, you can count on me. Fox has realized that his reason for making the game now is his audience. What started out as a passion project, a game which came to him in a dream, has spiraled into something bigger. It's a game with an audience of hundreds of thousands of people who have absolutely responded out loud. Just look at the mountains of fan content, the community set up to analyze and explore the game, the throngs of fans who await each and every update on the game's progress. Toby Fox's motivation to finish the game is no longer a promise to himself, but a promise to his audience, a group of people who have found such emotional resonance and meaning in his work. You can see this reflected in the second half of the FAQ quote I mentioned earlier. To a certain type of people, attuned a certain type of way, this game can reach a meaning beyond its appearance and find a shape in your heart. Even if there's just one person that feels that way, I will keep making this game to grow by your side. See you again soon. So he has doubled down. He knows exactly why he needs to see this project through. The letter disappears, and he walks away. I really like reading the Valentine's letter through this lens. It lines up really neatly with more straightforward statements Fox has made about his experience making Deltarune, and the conclusion is incredibly earnest, that he cares immensely about being able to share these ideas with the audience, to finally finish a game that hasn't just been on his mind for many years, but on the minds of his audience too. But while I've always been satisfied with that conclusion, whenever I would share it with other Deltarune fans, it didn't seem to quite work for them in the same way. At the time, I didn't have an answer for who this character was. And even if I did, there was no indication that Toby Fox would be interested in exploring these sorts of ideas in-game. Then chapters 3 and 4 came out, and everything changed. If you had asked me ahead of the new chapters to predict what the Eggman's appearance in chapter 3 would look like, I would have expected it to follow the same rough format as the last two. And I would have been wrong. Not only does finding the Eggman require some ridiculously specific steps, rather than walking simply back and forth, but his appearance itself is much more elaborate. Rather than one single room, we end up in Man Country, a Game Boy-style island inhabited by count 'em, six Rudens and the Eggman himself. Understanding the Eggman's appearance here requires us to combine the two theories we've just talked about. The Eggman as an exploration and deconstruction of Easter eggs in video games, and the Eggman as a mouthpiece for Toby Fox to talk about Deltarune. Let's first look at his dialogue in this chapter. Well, spring changed to summer, and summer changed to cold, and sure enough, I am the forgotten man. Will you forget me too? Are you sure? You've forgotten me many times before. Even if you meet me, I will be forgotten thereafter. Sometimes I even forget myself. I ask again, will you forget me? You'll remember me? Well, in that case, forget about it. I am just a man. Listen well to my story. Once upon a time, the whole world looked like this. Do you think so? Really? You believe something so absurd? I'm happy to hear it. Let me continue. Well, the world changed, society was developed, the earth was covered in water, dinosaurs appeared, an ice age. Actually, there are still dinosaurs. Is it mixed up? In any case, this island is the only place left I can talk. Do you understand what I'm saying? Funny, I haven't the faintest clue what it all means. But one day, this island will disappear too. We may not meet again in that case. Did you want to meet again? Oh joy, I'll tell you my schedule. Listen carefully. On Thursday, I go to sell the donuts. On Friday, I toss the leftovers in the dumpster. On Saturday, I let it cool on the windowsill. On Sunday, I harvest the wheat. Hold your breath, head to the left, and count backwards to 100. Did you remember to write that down? How very kind of you. Please take this to remember me. Although, you may lose it in another day, so be sure to put it somewhere. There's no shame in an egg. You're very opinionated. I like you. You may forget me, I may forget myself, but I will remember your kindness. Now, this island will disappear soon. You must depart. If you will it, we shall meet again at that place. Whether 11 hours or 11 years, Deltarune will be waiting. So take your time, wash your face, and get dressed. Unsurprisingly, it's pretty strange. But once you start to dig into his words, I think a picture starts to form. First of all, I think we should make a pretty key distinction here early on. The Eggman is speaking to the player here, not to Chris. This is pretty open to debate, but there are a couple reasons why I think this is the case. When he tells us where to find him, near the bake sale in Chapter 1, near the dumpster in Chapter 2, and at a window in Chapter 4, he asks us to write it down, something Chris obviously isn't doing. And even if they did, they can't go back in time. Chris has no conceivable way of heading back to the bake sale in Card Kingdom to find the Eggman, but we do. And of course he references Deltarune. He's not the only character to do so, and at this point it seems Deltarune doubles as the name of the prophecy. But as we'll get to soon, it seems clear he's talking about the game itself here. In fact, his line directly mirrors what we saw in the game's trailer, Deltarune is waiting. Along with the Valentine's letter, that's 2 pieces of supplemental material the Eggman references in his dialogue. And in fact, that's not even the end of the references. By calling himself the Forgotten Man, that is itself a reference to the game Mother, localized in the West as Earthbound Beginnings. The Forgotten Man in that game is pretty eerie. He's turned away from the player, hunched over. Steeped in depression, he claims that sometimes even breathing becomes too much. He even teeters on the edge of breaking the 4th wall. He says, "My conversation is always a monologue." This is referring to his loneliness, of course, but it also rings true for him as a character in a video game, interacting with a silent protagonist. I'll let Toby Fox himself explain what he finds compelling about the character.
Has anyone noticed the translation in Earthbound Beginnings? The stilted, outdated word choices make everything feel extremely surreal, and kind of scary. I think this is great and lends the game a unique atmosphere compared to Earthbound. I think the best example is the Forgotten Man of Magi Can't. In the Japanese version, he's a slightly tough guy who just considers being forgotten his hobby, and by paying attention to him, you're getting in his way. In the English version, due to the phrasing and some slight mistranslations, he instead sounds like a meek and pathetic man who wants nothing more than to give into his own loneliness and depression. He easily has the most depressing monologue of any character on the NES, making him, ironically, maybe more unforgettable than the Japanese version.
This really stuck out to me because the Eggman seems to encompass both sides of this dichotomy. Prior to the release of chapters 3 and 4, I saw a lot of people say they found the Eggman creepy. You enter this room alone, your party members nowhere to be seen. The layout is already mirroring something else we know to find unsettling. The music is ripped straight from a 2012 fan song Fox created for the game Yume Nikki, titled Waltz of Second Masada, which adds to this uncomfortable, off-kilter feeling, like a broken down carnival ride. The dialogue is stilted, disjointed. In some ways, I find it reminiscent of these now deleted tweets from 2014, where Toby Fox imagines a world where Luigi disappears, just an unfilled gap where he once was. There's all this unspoken tension under the surface of the Egg Room in chapters 1 and 2. But then we finally get to speak to the Eggman in chapter 3, and he seems quite earnest, friendly even. Regardless, what's interesting is that in Chapter 3, the Eggman is deeply rooted in the history of video games, an era that no longer exists. A sign outside reads, "This island is a World Heritage Site." While there are lots of reasons a place can be considered a World Heritage Site in real life, one of the criterion is to bear a unique or at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition or to a civilization which is living or which has now disappeared. Toby Fox is lamenting an era of video games that has now disappeared, particularly the early to mid-90s. Man Country, as a sign calls it, is a remnant of that, the last bastion of it. The Eggman says as much. Once upon a time, the whole world looked like this. And yes, there was a time when games looked like this, if you're too young to remember. It's most likely an era Toby Fox remembers fondly. He grew up in the 90s and into the early 2000s. While he's slightly too young to have seen the Game Boy come out and enjoy it right in its heyday, he has older brothers who would have ensured that he played and fell in love with that era of games. The Eggman suggests that it's absurd, because it kind of is. Games look like this now. In a lot of ways, it's kind of inconceivable to think the games were once the ugliest shade of green you can imagine. Either way, society was developed, the world changed, games progressed technologically, and notably, the internet was developed and mass adopted. We began cruising down the digital highway. So in the present day, this era of games is being forgotten. The indie scene is doing what it can to keep the style and lessons of retro games alive, but Man Country, this island, seems to represent that last bastion of a bygone era of games. It's the only place left the Eggman can talk, and it's on the verge of disappearing. In the files for Chapter 3, although unused, are these 3 sprites of Chris, Susie, and Ralsei. They're drawn in a way that aligns less with the Zelda-influenced mini-RPG sections, but something more akin to early Pokemon games. And all 3 of them are dead. Toby Fox feels that an era of games isn't just being forgotten, it's dying. And this is where it ties back into Easter eggs, to video game secrets. When describing the Eggman to people, I realize it sounds a lot like a classic video game rumor, the type you'd hear on the playground as a kid. You found a strange hidden room where a creepy guy hands you a secret item and then disappears. It's this specifically which I think Toby Fox is mourning here in Chapter 3. Those rumors can't exist anymore, not like they used to. There was a time when you couldn't just look it up online and find out if it's true or not. You had to do what I did and try to unlock Luigi in Mario 64 and then bask in anger when it didn't work. The Eggman and Man Country itself isn't just a remnant of an old era of video games, but an old era of video game secrets. I think that's why the Eggman is so hard to find in Chapter 3. These are the steps you have to take. Go to this specific TV puzzle, throw the blue box in this specific spot between the trees, head to this particular spotlight and get caught, select cheetah and then nowhere, solve this puzzle with the box you threw earlier, talk to this bibliox until you get a ticket, then backtrack until you encounter a Ribic enemy, select the act croak on X, and then hold left. Okay, now tell me you've never heard something very similar about unlocking Luigi in Mario 64. I'm serious, it was always run in circles around the Ella's real statue in the courtyard 2,401 times, then collect exactly 12 stars before heading back to the courtyard and giving your controller a tender kiss, no tongue, for Luigi to appear. In Chapter 3, the Eggman is that type of video game playground rumor brought to life. It's Mew under the truck in Pokemon Red and Blue, finding Bigfoot in GTA San Andreas. Rumors that simply don't, or perhaps can't, exist anymore with modern games. But there is a positive spin to this whole thing. It isn't just doom and gloom, lamenting an era we can't return to. Toby Fox instead asks us to keep the memory alive. Think about the origin of Easter eggs like we discussed earlier. They were a way for developers to ensure they got the credit they deserved for their hard work, to immortalize themselves within their game, to not be forgotten. The Eggman asks us to put the eggs somewhere, which we can do. We take them back to the light world and hide them in various locations. By doing so, we're immortalizing the Eggman, ensuring that he lives on even once Man Country disappears, even when the industry has changed beyond recognition and this era of video games is fully left behind. By hiding these eggs, we're ensuring that the enjoyment of classic games, and particularly their mysteries, survives. And it's working. He's beginning to appear in the light world as a result. There's this interaction in Chapter 2 with the Eggman in a car, and this one at the diner in Chapter 4. Both of these only appear if you found the egg in the previous chapter. He essentially shares this purpose himself. Please take this to remember me. We are keeping his memory alive, the memory of that era of secrets, rumors, and Easter eggs. This also adds another spin to the Czech dialogue. Not too important, games will continue to be made even without the things the Eggman symbolizes, but not too unimportant. Those things still change the way we interact with, understand, and enjoy video games. Now, that commentary extends out to trophies too. Toby Fox has made it clear in the past that he doesn't like adding achievements to his games, but Sony requires trophies for games on their platform, so the PlayStation versions of Undertale and Deltarune both have them, albeit with some malicious compliance. There's one particularly interesting trophy that ties back to the Eggman, and that's Chapter 3 End, with the description complete without issue. Here's what Toby Fox said about it when he announced the addition of trophies. There may be certain conditions where you will miss acquiring Chapter End trophies. I don't think it's something an average player would run across, however. But really, I think you'll enjoy the game more if you don't pay attention to whether you got the trophies. He says there are certain conditions where it won't unlock, but in fact there's only one condition, and that's getting the egg from the Eggman. The era of video games that Man Country harkens back to didn't have trophies or achievements. Those only really came into play as we know them today with the launch of the Xbox 360 in 2005. What he's saying here is that trophies are a false incentive to find secrets. The secret is the reward in and of itself. The way it engages you with the game and asks you to dig a bit deeper, the mysteries associated with it, that should be the reason players search for secrets like the Eggman. And so he has some fun at the expense of trophy hunters. If you search for the Eggman purely because you expect a trophy for finding the secret, like you would expect in most modern games, Toby Fox instead takes a trophy away. In this case, complete without issue is tongue-in-cheek, referencing his own distaste for the incentives behind achievements. It's something more akin to mindlessly consume the content. Either way, this is the Eggman's conclusion. Whether 11 hours or 11 years in the future, Toby Fox will continue to make Deltarune, a game that is undeniably a love letter to the same era of games we're talking about here. He will continue to do his part to preserve what is, in a lot of ways, a dying art. Our job as an audience is to continue engaging with it. Not just Toby Fox's own games, but indie titles more broadly, the games that are carrying the torch from that era. Outside of Deltarune, Toby Fox regularly champions other indie games, encouraging people to pick them up. It's clearly something he cares a lot about. So, as the audience, we must continue finding the eggs, buying into the mysteries and eccentricities of the game. We must let the cycle continue by re-hiding the eggs, passing that enjoyment and connection onto the next person who stumbles across them. The joy of finding an Easter egg renewed for another person. As we walk away from the tree, Chris has changed from their light world to their dark world sprite. We've wholeheartedly bought into the promise of what video games can do, what these mysteries and rumours mean for our enjoyment and connection to them, and we've told the Eggman that we'll do our part in preserving that experience. So Chris changes from their ordinary, mundane light world self back to their fantasy, gamified self. Moving on to chapter 4, I think this is where everything ties together. The egg room is shorter, but in a lot of ways I think it acts as the bridge between the ideas we explored with the Valentine's letter earlier and the ideas around the culture of video games and their secrets, as we just discussed. Upon finding this chapter's egg room, Chris enters what appears to be a doctor's office, with a blacked out room where an art club or perhaps some kind of art therapy is taking place. The Eggman is pointing to a canvas, and Chris can sketch out a drawing to get an egg. Let's take a look at what it says. Well, there is a canvas here. Will you draw? Chris picked up a pencil. They began by sketching what they had seen behind the tree, but as they sketched, the line began to err, as if the pencil had lost its way. So they started again, drawing over the lines they had already made. Many times they would suddenly halt, or the pencil drifted into a new drawing. So they started over again. Through many repetitions, their movements became faster and smoother, until without looking, they had completed a sketch in a single wild line. In the end, as a result of layering the sketches on top of each other, the surface of the canvas was nothing more than a monochrome smear. Next, a tree was painted over it, painted over everything, leaving nothing but a simple, still life. After all, there wasn't anything to look at in the room besides a single tree. Chris got up. It seemed the painting was complete, but their hand, smudged with graphite, was still moving, as if to trace some unseen shape. An egg was picked up from a nearby easel. And then once you're done, you can interact with the sink. You ran water over your hands and dried them. Between your fingers, a faint grey crease glittered stubbornly. You can never wash it all away. In this sequence, Toby Fox is talking about the creative process. We watch as Chris goes through the motions of creating an artwork, and although it's described through a canvas with pencils and paint, Toby Fox is a game developer at his core. He's talking about making a video game. Chris starts out by drawing what they saw behind the tree. This is their initial spark of inspiration. They saw something they liked and tried to copy it directly. You can see this in Toby Fox's early work too. He's spoken in the past about teaching himself piano by learning songs from his favourite video games. He's also the creator of the infamous Earthbound Halloween hack, a ROM hack he made when he was 16, which is very clearly inspired by Earthbound and Brandish. He's said in the past that he's embarrassed in hindsight, which is nearly universal. I don't know anyone who doesn't have some writing or art from their teenage years that they instinctively cringe at. Chris experiences the same thing here. The line begins to err and the pencil loses its way. To make something you're proud of, you have to take your own creative liberties. It can't be entirely derivative. So Chris starts again, notably not erasing that early work, that core inspiration, but drawing directly on top of it. That's the key difference between something like the Earthbound Halloween hack, which uses characters and ideas lifted directly from someone else's work, and Undertale, which isn't shy about its inspirations which so obviously form the basis. Games like Earthbound and Brandish are still very much at the core of Undertale, but it still acts as something entirely new, forefronting Fox's own ideas and characters. Along the way, Chris gets distracted, they begin to procrastinate or explore new ideas, but they keep working, honing their craft. And eventually, what was once an obviously derivative work, a drawing of the Eggman, is now just a smear, a blanket of all kinds of ideas, influences, and inspirations. That's the foundation that Chris then builds on for their final work, still not erasing those early attempts at making something good, but learning from them, using them as a springboard for their finished work, the story they want to tell, a simple still life. This, I think, is why this NPC appears in Chapter 4's Egg Room. A character who apologizes, references Art Club, and mentions being in a rush. It aligns pretty clearly with the hidden Undertale character's So Sorry. I don't want to spend too long talking about this because it's a touchy subject which involves a lot of internet drama I've no interest involving myself in. What's key though is that, in a way, So Sorry represents a misstep for Toby Fox in his previous work. Not the character itself, but how he dealt with the fallout. After people online harassed the Kickstarter backer who designed So Sorry, Fox acknowledged in a post on Tumblr that he had made a mistake by not calling out that harassment earlier. Since Undertale was largely a solo project, Fox hadn't honed the communication skills you need when you're spearheading a project to ensure that everyone you're working with is on the same page and happy about the decisions being made. Now with Deltarune, Fox is leading an entire team to develop the game. He's working with big companies like Nintendo. Learning to be a good communicator at every step of the production is hugely important, and I think that was most likely one of his big takeaways from making Undertale. In a room about the experience of making an artwork, the mistakes and the triumphs, it makes sense that he would acknowledge a misstep of his own here. Back to Chris, and despite finishing the artwork they set out to make, they still want to continue. Their hand continues to move. This is a sentiment Toby Fox expressed back in 2015, right before starting work in earnest on Deltarune. The itch to continue creating, to tell the next story, never goes away. Chris washes their hands, but some of the graphite stays behind. The inspiration you take from other art, the lessons you learn while making your own, the skills you develop through constant practice. You can never wash it all away. The receptionist is the final payoff to this scene. When you first enter the room, they say, "Chris, there you are, the patients are waiting for you." Chris, as the artist, is framed as the therapist leading this art therapy session. Then once they finish with the artwork and get the egg, the receptionist says, "Well, how did the session go?" They say art is therapeutic. Which one of you was the patient, anyway? This ties back into the Valentine's letter from earlier. It's hard to tell sometimes whether you're making art for your audience or for yourself, whether it's meant to help others or yourself. It's a blurred line between the artist and the audience, the helper and the helped. Art is therapeutic, both to consume it and to make it yourself. But you got paid, didn't you? Chapter 4's Eggman room directly follows on from Chapter 3, in a way that isn't obvious at first glance. If Man Country is the last bastion of a bygone era of games, a place where secrets retain their mystique and spread like playground rumors, where a game is allowed to earnestly look like this despite new releases looking like this, the Doctor's Office in Chapter 4 is a roadmap for what we should do next. It's not enough to simply lament the loss of an era we can't go back to. Toby Fox is asking players to follow in his footsteps, to build on our inspirations and make the art we want to see. If not for video games culturally, then for ourselves, for the intrinsic value of creating. Taking it as a whole, the Eggman is an incredibly rich topic. There's so much here to analyze and explore. And yet somehow, throughout this entire video, I haven't made a single connection to Deltarune's wider lore. There's got to be a portion of people who clicked on this video expecting the punchline to be Gaster, although they probably clicked away when I started talking about Atari corporate policy in the 1980s. Still, Gaster or not, I trust that a fair amount of people still have that lingering question. What does this mean for the narrative? What's the point? But to be honest, I think it's a mistake to think that everything has to connect back to the game's narrative. In my Eggman blog post, this is something I called the commodification of lore, when information in a game like Deltarune is only as interesting as its contributions to that bigger picture. If we're not getting Chris backstory or Gaster hints or prophecy implications, then why should we care? But if you've made it this far into the video, I trust that you already know the answer to that question. To be clear, there are some interesting things to draw on if you're looking for lore. The Rudens in Chapter 3 have some interesting insight about Chris, for example. But lore isn't the be-all and end-all, certainly not in a game like Deltarune. What's important is what we can take away from the work, what Toby Fox is trying to say with the work. What message is he trying to impart on the audience? So let's piece it all together. At first glance, Deltarune's Eggman is a deconstruction of the video game Easter egg. This is emphasized in the way that we encounter him, and the way it parallels not just one of the most iconic Easter eggs of all time in adventure, but one of Toby Fox's own most iconic Easter eggs, the Mystery Man encounter in Undertale. By breaking the idea of the Easter egg down to its bare essentials in the first 2 chapters, Fox proves its inherent worth, its value as a concept. At Atari in the 80s, they realized that Easter eggs would incentivize players to spend more time with a game, to pay closer attention, to not just hunt for secrets, but anticipate them. The Eggman proves them right. Despite being an incredibly bare-bones iteration of that idea, a secret one can find either by incredible luck or mindless repetition, with a fairly inconsequential item as a reward, players immediately latched on to the idea, spawning countless theories and interpretations. The pure existence of something so bizarre and kind of creepy led a ton of people to be on the lookout for further secrets on the fringes of the game. And what do you know, there are lots of them. Going forward into Chapter 3, we're able to speak to the Eggman directly. It takes a very specific sequence of steps which feels reminiscent of classic video game rumors, like unlocking Luigi in Mario 64, or finding Mew under the truck in Pokemon Red and Blue. His island, the last remnants of an era of video games and video game secrets, is about to disappear. So to keep that memory alive, not just the pixelated graphics or the unverifiable rumors, but the emotions that elicits, the feeling of chasing a secret in a video game, we're tasked with hiding his eggs around the light world. By doing so, we're making sure that that experience doesn't disappear. The next person to find the egg will have the same experience of uncovering something unusual. And we know it's working too, as the Eggman starts to pop up in the light world when we do so, in the traffic jam and at the diner. Despite seeing himself as the Forgotten Man, we're proving that moniker wrong, ensuring that he isn't forgotten. And then finally in Chapter 4, Toby Fox asks us to take it a step further. He reflects on his own experience creating art, starting out by recreating his inspirations, before building on top of that to create a work of art that is unique and earnest to him, Undertale. The experience of making art is cathartic, and he questions whether he's doing it for himself or for the audience, something he also explores in the Valentine's letter. Either way, it's an offer to the player directly, to go out and make the art they want to see, to learn from their inspirations and paint something new atop the monochrome smear of artistic influences. So with that, the only remaining question is, what's next? Where does the Eggman go from here? Unfortunately, it's not a question I have a concrete answer for. He does give us a hint to his location in Chapter 5, on Sunday I harvest the wheat, so we have something vague to be on the lookout for. And while we have no way of knowing what form that appearance will take, we can expect that Fox will continue to build on these ideas, this mix between his personal sentiments on creating art, as we see in the Valentine's letter and in the Chapter 4 Egg Room, and the history and purpose of video game secrets and Easter eggs, as we see in the first 3 Egg Rooms. Whatever the case, the biggest takeaway for me is that we need to preserve what makes video games special. All art forms are unique, each one has its own way of capturing its audience and providing them with an experience they can't get anywhere else. And with video games, the feeling of mystery is incredibly powerful. For a short time, you can feel like anything is possible. Maybe I really can unlock Luigi. Maybe there is a hidden egg if I go through this strange, implausible checklist. We should preserve that ability to uncover things on our own, that search for hidden interactions and weird idiosyncrasies that make video games so compelling, if not by supporting the artists out there making those games, then by making them ourselves. Hey, thanks for watching this video. I'm very glad to finally get all these ideas out of my head. Feel free to leave a comment if you think I missed anything, or if you have any other thoughts about the Eggman and what his purpose might be. Like I said, all this stuff is very open to interpretation. I like to think I've done a good job at analysing it, but I'd love to hear any other thoughts people have. Before I go, I have a few thank yous to give. A big thank you to my friend Pigeon, who made the thumbnail for this video, as well as the Gaster Spin GIF. And of course I'd like to thank my friend Solaris, who proofread this script. In fact, continuing with the tradition of recommending other Deltarune related videos, they have a video coming out very soon about Raise Up Your Bat. It's a lot more lore important than you might think. If you're mad at me for talking at you for 50 minutes about the new chapters without even mentioning December Holiday, then this will be the video for you. It's not out quite yet, but it will be very soon. In fact, it might already be out by the time you're hearing this, so go take a look. The link to their channel is in the description. Finally, a thank you to all of the channels who provided footage for this video. You can find links to all of them in my sources document, alongside everything else I used while writing this video. Anyway, that's about it. Video's over.